Hi and welcome to tutorial 4. In the previous tutorial we developed a simple web application. We wrote a simple servlet and we executed the servlet's do-get method. We also understood how Tomcat interacts with the web application to identify what method of what servlet needs to run. We did all the configurations in our previous tutorial using annotations. We used a simple web servlet annotation and we mentioned what is a URL pattern that the servlet catches. There's actually another way in which we can configure servlets. In fact, before annotation support was introduced in Java, the only way to configure the servlet was using the XML. So that's another thing that we're going to have a look at. We'll learn how to do the same thing, which is create a simple web servlet, but this time using XML configuration. So the XML that we're going to configure is in the web.inf folder. The name of the XML is web.xml. Web.xml is normally called as the deployment descriptor in a web application. So what that means is the XML contains the information which is required for deploying the application and for running the application. So let's open up the project that we have already created. You can open up the deployment descriptor. I have the source here. Again, let me remove the welcome file list. Don't need that for now. Okay, so right now our deployment descriptor contains nothing except for the display name and of course the XML header. So the only value we have in the deployment descriptor is the web app node, and we have the display name. So all the other configuration are going to go in this space. It's going to be inside this web app node. So we're going to create another servlet and we're going to put the configuration here this time. So what we'll do is we'll go to the Java resources, source. In the same package, I'll create a new servlet. I'm going to create a class this time. So I'll call this the XML servlet, and this will extend HTTP servlet. This is the one, and it will not have any main methods and inherit the abstract methods. Say finish. Okay, so here's our bare bones servlet class, which really doesn't do anything. What we'll do is we'll copy the same do-get from our previous class and we'll paste it here. So it makes sure you've got all the imports. It automatically does the import. If not, just make sure you add them up. Okay, so now we have the do-get here, but we need to tell the web application that this has to be run upon calling a particular URL. Earlier we used to do that by mentioning the deployment descriptor here, but we're not going to do that here. We're going to use the web.xml and we're going to mention the deployment descriptor related information over here. So in order to mention that this is the servlet that gets executed, first I need to give the servlet a name. So I'll create the servlet node, and in the servlet node I will have a node called servlet name, which tells what the name of the servlet is. I'm going to call this XML servlet. Okay, for this name I need to mention what class is being called when you access the servlet. So the class that we are going to call is xmlservlet.java. So I'll create a node called servlet class here, and I'll give this class name, of course, with the package name. Okay, so we have defined a servlet here. We have mentioned that we want XML servlet class to be a servlet, and we have given it a name. You can give it any name here. This is you want to make it explanatory so that you get to know what that servlet does. But there are actually no rules that this has to be same as the class name. It can be anything. The reason why we give a servlet name here is so that we are also going to map this servlet to a particular URL. So that's the second part of the annotations that we did earlier. We had a property of the annotations called URL pattern. So we're going to give a URL pattern that maps to this servlet, so that whenever an HTTP access is made for that URL pattern, the servlet gets executed. So let's go ahead and define that URL pattern here. So I'm going to create another node called servlet mapping. It should be in lowercase. So what servlet mapping does is it takes one of the servlets that you've defined here and it maps it to a particular URL pattern. So let me do that. I'll just say servlet name. Actually, in fact, I can copy the same line here. So what we're saying is this servlet, the XML servlet, has to be mapped to this URL pattern. Call that slash XML servlet path. I'm just going to add a path so that not everything is the same name. You might get confused. So yeah, that does it. So I have a servlet node which says, okay, this is the name of my servlet and this is the class of my servlet. And then we have another node called servlet mapping which says this is the name of the servlet and then this is the URL mapping. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to save this class and we are all set. Of course, we can execute this now, but in order to see something happening, let me create a simple system out. Let's say XML servlet called. So when we check the console, we'll know that this has executed. So now I can go ahead and right click, run on server. Tomcat starts. It's going to call this XML servlet path. Then it says XML servlet call, which means that the doGet method has executed. So what's happening here is very similar to what we did in our earlier tutorial. Instead of having an annotation here, we moved the configuration to the web.xml file, and Tomcat reads this file also to get the information about what servlet to run when a particular URL is accessed, and that's how it got to know that this has to run, and then it is called this particular servlet. If you compare this configuration, this servlet and servlet mapping configuration, if you compare it with our previous annotation configuration, you can see that this is actually more. You have more things to type and more stuff to do when compared to a single line of annotation configuration. So the question you would ask is, why would I need to do that? I think annotation is a much simpler way to do this. There are two reasons why we need to know how to do this. One is, of course, as I mentioned before, annotation support started only from Java version 5. Before that, and of course sometime after that also, people were using the XML configuration. A lot of people still use XML configuration. So to try to understand code which was written earlier, we need to know how to configure this in an XML based format. The second reason why you would want to learn and in fact even use this kind of a configuration is the annotation configuration is tied to the class itself. Say I make an annotation configuration here and I want to change it. I will have to compile this class and I'll have to deploy it again. Whereas in the case of an XML configuration, I just have to make the change to the XML and then of course restart Tomcat, and then the changes are going to take effect. I don't have to change the code and I don't have to recompile and redeploy. We do, however, have to restart Tomcat because Tomcat looks at the web.xml when it starts up. Say there are 5 applications deployed in the Tomcat folder. It's going to look at the web.xml of all those 5 applications and make a note of the configurations. So once Tomcat has started, if you change web.xml, it's not going to take effect. So whenever you make changes to this file, you will have to restart Tomcat. But that's all that you have to do. You don't have to compile and build. The reason why you want to use annotations instead of a web.xml configuration is, of course, it's less verbose. You don't have to type a lot. And the beauty of annotations is that it carries a lot of meaning depending on where the annotation is written. See, in this case, I need to mention what class it is, what is the package, and what is the path. In the case of annotation, since I'm writing it inside the Java class, I don't have to mention what class I'm referring to because it's implicit. So that's one advantage of using annotations. It's less verbose and it's much more easier to understand. I look at a class and I can know what are the configurations instead of referring to 2 different files. So again, this is one more thing that you should be knowing, and you can choose either of these options when you are developing your own servlets.